Welcome to Vision to Venture, the podcast where we talk to leaders in the tech world. In each episode, we chat with entrepreneurs, tech experts, and leaders within the tech space to hear their stories. If you're curious about tech, starting a business, or just want to hear inspiring stories, this podcast is for you. Make sure to follow and subscribe to never miss an episode. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Vision to Venture. Today, we have a guest who has bridged the gap between medicine and entrepreneurship, Dr. Rupprecht Milojcic. Rupprecht started his career as a doctor, but soon realized that the administrative burden in healthcare was taking valuable time away from patient care. That led him to co-found DAMEDIC, a company that's changing medical billing. Today, we'll explore his journey from doctor to entrepreneur, why administrative inefficiencies in healthcare are so difficult to fix, and how AI-powered billing solutions like DAMEDIC are shaping the future of medical administration. Let's get started. Hi, Rupprecht. Welcome to Vision to Venture.
Jason, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, brilliant. Obviously appreciate your time, Rupi. Thank you for that. Let's maybe take it back to when you started as a doctor, but then quickly moved into entrepreneurship. What would you say drove you to make that shift?
Be frank, actually, the shift into entrepreneurship happened way earlier than actually becoming a doctor. I started studying medicine always with the idea of going into business, whatever that meant at the time. Just figured being a doctor by exam would have the great fallback option, maybe to also, if the things wouldn't work out, to always have a good job. But that actually was never in my mind. It was more, okay, it's a great study path. You have lots of options, and options always kept me going, in the sense that exploring the world, traveling around, seeing different cultures, and getting an open mindset by doing so, in order to understand the other perspective of the world and the people that live there. So what then drove me to entrepreneurship in the end was friends, just gathering with the people that had that sort of a mindset, aggregated over time. And I would say, so it wasn't really me that did that shift. It was more that circumstance that sort of carried me with it towards entrepreneurship. And
Yeah.
it's really a pleasurable path, and I enjoyed it actually most every day.
Yeah. So you basically had, the thought of being an entrepreneur before becoming a doctor. I guess, as you say, became a doctor kind of to fall back on if potentially being an entrepreneur didn't really work out. You could always fall back into being a doctor. I mean, would you say that you always had that entrepreneurial mindset? Or I mean, obviously you said, spending time with friends and kind of your circle created that, but would you say you had it from an early age, or was it something that did develop over time?
I guess you always have that certain personality type in you that doesn't really change or evolve, or really critically change. I think it evolves in that sense that the people surround you shape you by it, and your experiences with them carry you on that path. And I in my study times, when I was at Munich, was the great pleasure that actually my university at the time gave me opportunities to kind of spend time in different topics than as in medicine. So I joined some business courses at the chair of entrepreneurship. It's actually called that, from a great professor called Christine Achleitner, who's a well-known business and academic figure in Germany. And related to that, it sort of gave me a different perspective. And I had a job then that was at a venture capitalist firm, where we worked as a young student, as a just working student. And it kind of proved my interest in that field, innovation, medicine. It's a great sort of a area to be in, with different perspectives. And then actually we founded our first company within our study time. So with other friends at here in Munich, which was my uni, we founded a company that at the time sort of brought a mobile phone to the German market. At the time, that was pre-iPhone times, 2005, 6, something like that. The first G3 ready dual SIM phone. That was So we found a manufacturer, etc. It was just a great experience, a great team. Most of these guys from that time carried on and actually became entrepreneurs also, or stayed entrepreneurs, let's call it that way, because I guess we were student entrepreneurs at that time already. But so the circumstances and the surrounding leveraged that spark. And well, then later finishing med school, going to Boston, starting there at the med school in Harvard. Just it's an environment. If you're interested in that topic, it carries you with it, and it's just, yeah, you just get a sort of stuck, put your head out, and you feel the wind, and
Yeah.
that's a feeling I really enjoyed. And then sort of why I then eventually became a doctor in Boston, also then later in Erlangen as a practitioner or resident,
Yeah.
was a sentence from a person I talked to earlier, pretty a senior entrepreneur who was a doctor as well in this first life. And he said, okay, if you study that subject, medicine, and you do not become a doctor with it at any time, you're always going to ask yourself, did I walk the right path? Because it's a study that sort of, you have to dedicate quite some time in it. It's hard work. And then all of that is actually normally dedicated to the patient and to the processes related to it. And if you have no judgment in the sense that you have experienced it, that work, you always might have that question mark in the back of your head. Why didn't I do it? And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I wanted to clear for myself. And at the same time, I had the joy of working in two extraordinary clinics that
Okay.
gave me a wonderful perspective on how good patient care actually is organized and then delivered, in the sense that it's not only sort of enjoyable for the doctor in a person and in its passion, or it's in its job description, but also on an economical sense. Sort of process has to work in order to earn the money that is necessary to provide these structures that deliver the
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
So that's maybe a bit of an extended answer to that question, but because there's not one factor, right? There's multiple things that shape you in life, and I think if you do have a certain personality type, that is sort of prone to that kind of thinking, entrepreneurial thinking. There's different personality types that sort of affiliate with it, but that in the end is a spark somewhere in the back of your head, and then you got to bring it out somehow, and that's either by yourself or by the circles you're surrounding you with. And I had the luck that my friend, because my family is more sort of a academical type of background. Most of my ancestors have sort of grown up
Yeah.
in academia, and I think my father and also others never thought about being or becoming an entrepreneur, and they worked sort of classical paths. So
Yeah.
it was certainly not my family background that brought me to that thing, what I'm doing today. Still,
Yeah.
they gave me the chance, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, brilliant. This episode is sponsored by Enigma. Enigma help connect machine learning and software engineering talent with groundbreaking opportunities in the field of AI. So whether you're a company searching for exceptional tech talent or an individual seeking that perfect role, Enigma is your go-to solution. Thanks to Enigma for sponsoring Vision to Venture. Rupi, and I mean, you touched on when you were at uni in Munich, you obviously founded that business. Was that Phytogram or Phytogram? Not sure how to pronounce it, but was it
No,
that business that you founded?
that was before. That was called. It had a great name actually. It had one of the best logos also. It was called
Yeah.
Bellpepper.
Okay.
Bellpepper, and
Yeah.
with the idea actually that in bell peppers you sometimes, like in a bell pepper, like in a vegetable,
Yeah.
most of the time you have like a little secondary bell pepper within the peel of the bell
Yeah.
pepper itself. And because we
Okay.
had two SIM cards in one phone, that was sort of the idea. And yeah, so that
Okay.
was something different.
Yeah.
But Phytogram later was actually after working, or actually becoming a doctor. Then I was in Boston, afterwards in Erlangen. Um,
Yeah.
as said, I always had the idea of at some point in time leaving clinics, because yeah, the sort of way how the care is being delivered is great. However, I was sure pretty much at the first after the first couple of months, that's not what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And
Yeah.
then Phytogram came across, in the sense that a at the time actually pretty unknown friend, through a club of entrepreneurs which I founded as a student. He was an investment banker at the time, and we met at one of our events, sort of student entrepreneurship events, and he came to me and said, "Rupi, we got to do something in the digital healthcare area."
Yeah.
And he was an investment banker for some bank in London. We met in October. That's when he sort of quoted me that, or said that to me in a quote. And in I think he quit his job in January, moved on my sofa in Erlangen. My wife was kind of not amused. However, he moved to us, and
Yeah.
in Erlangen, and slept just as a third party member in our flat. And
Yeah.
when I came home from the clinics, we worked on our business case, Phytogram, and then actually started the company the summer after.
Yeah.
And that's also the point in time where I quit being a doctor, and
Okay.
moved on to entrepreneurship. And Phytogram actually started as a idea of, I mean, digital health care space is this can be everything and nothing. And it was the idea of enabling small and medium-sized companies to provide corporate health to their employees. And
Okay.
that was sort of the core idea, because in the sense, sitting is the new smoking. We
Yeah.
wanted to have these sort of medium-sized and small companies also to have a chance of providing that, because at the time, larger companies would provide it.
Yeah.
However, the small ones wouldn't. And then we started off, we created that marketplace. We invited companies to invite their employees, and they would be able to subsidize, in the end, fitness courses to lower their probabilities of getting sick, in the sense of orthopedical sick, back pains,
Yeah.
etc. And
Yeah.
however, figured it even though the cost itself for a course would be, if it's subsidized, would be lowered, I don't know, from €100 to €20 for the employee, um, it didn't change their behavior.
Yeah.
So the ones that were prone to sport, were fit, they liked it, because they didn't have
Yeah.
to pay that much anymore. The ones that
Yeah.
didn't do sports before didn't change it.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we then actually pivoted to that pure marketplace logic. And at the time, it was clear to me that, okay, I'm not going to build an e-commerce business. We had the sort of foundations for it. François, my co-founder at the time, uh, um, he's a great guy. He carried it on, and actually, well, we were then sort of bought up by Urban Sports Club at the time. That was just was a company that had been has at the time had just been started, um,
Yeah.
and they needed that sort of a booking marketplace engine, and that's what we provided them with.
Yeah.
However, to be frank, there was mostly Francois and sort of the team then that really carried that on into Urban Sports Club. I was out at the time, and
Yeah.
then decided to go back into medicine, but sort of on the business side of it,
Yeah.
being a consultant, and just sort of I had a good friend at the time who was just they just sort of left a larger company consultancy called McKinsey, quite known, and
Yeah.
they just sort of separated from it and built a vertical healthcare service focused sort of strategy consultancy, and I joined them because it was and is a good friend, and it was just
Yeah.
very convenient
Yeah.
to start working with them because I knew he's a great guy, and also his boss and the team that sort of created the company was well. It's been a pleasure ride with them, and I had 3 pleasant years understanding non-functional hospitals, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And would you say it was more the pull, obviously going back into medicine after Phytogram, was it more the pull of getting back into medicine? Or as you mentioned, it was a friend, colleague, that you wanted to obviously work with. It
No,
was convenient. What was
no,
more the
no.
pull factor there?
It was I wanted to understand or have an opportunity to understand dynamics in the healthcare service world, meaning in the provider world.
Okay.
And I always liked hospitals and the dynamics of it. However, I mean, already at the time, the dynamics were quite in sort of in comparison between the different hospitals, just highly heterogeneous. Just when
Yeah.
I just maybe step back, when I applied out of Boston to Germany and to become a doctor here, I had a couple of interviews and also sort of trial out days at
Yeah.
different larger university clinics, and it was just kind of mind blowing how different the atmospheres and the dynamics in these clinics were. And I got lucky because I was accepted at, I guess, one of the best clinics for here ENT in
Yeah.
Erlangen, which was just organized in a wonderful way, very strict way. But the uh, here the boss of the clinic, the chair of ophthalmology, otolaryngology, he was a
Yeah.
great orchestra. He was a guy that really knew how to drive a clinic. And then as a
Yeah.
consultant, seeing all the other clinics, it was just great to see that how
Yeah.
dysfunctional some clinics were. And in the end,
Yeah.
a clinic is a process or a construct of processes, at the time at least, that is highly personnel driven. So people drive the processes, and there's all these decision points of how you interact, how you decide, etc. And it's all of it is mostly driven by people that decide, that do, and there's almost no processes in place that really decide on or give a structure that is sort of repetitive in a way that you could actually just take it and implement it somewhere else, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, perfect. I mean, obviously great. Thank you for sharing, kind of the backstory from university into medicine, founding Phytogram,
Yeah.
the Bellpepper as well, obviously incredible. Let's talk a bit now about DAMEDIC. What was your initial vision for DAMEDIC? And I mean, how has that evolved over time?
Well, the initial vision, and still is the vision statement and the sort of the spark that defines our belief, spend time with patients and not admin.
Yeah.
Um, there's if you have institution like a hospital, praxis, whatever it is, there should be only one consuming time factor, and that should be the patient and the caring of that person. Because I
Yeah.
mean, you could think it differently, but that's you go to a place in order to get healthy again, and in order
Yeah.
to do so, you just want to have the appreciation for it. And as we know, the mind of patients has a tremendous effect on the healing process in the end, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it,
The
reconvalescence,
recovery.
the
Yeah.
recovery itself, and your
Yeah.
mindset just plays a huge role. And if you give confidence and you give clarity to a
Yeah.
patient, that's what you want to give, aside of good treatment itself, obviously. But the
Yeah.
mind has a tremendous effect. So therefore, if you look at the processes in clinics or also practices, you're just, astonished of how much of that is actually not happening. So
Yeah.
that's our goal to change that. Obviously, that's multifactorial, right? So there's not only
Yeah.
one thing you can change. There's hundreds, probably thousands of things you can change in order to get or to contribute to that overall ambition and goal.
Yeah. And I mean, why do you think that the industry has been slow to try and solve this issue? I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, the vision of DAMEDIC is, more time with patients, less time with administrative, issues and work. But why do you think the industry's been, slow to resolve this?
The healthcare industry is an industry where a lot of regulation is taking place, and as we see it in all the other fields, despite separate also to medicine. I mean, you go to the construction business or whatever, everywhere you see that regulations are sort of regulated and overregulating itself. And I think that dynamic basically is happening in healthcare to a very extended way. And that's just because the system is not designed by the patients and sort of by the people that are working on the direct interactions with it, but by people that are thinking about the risks in the end and the monetary structures.
Yeah.
And therefore, yeah, there's just different interests that sort of drive these complications in the end. And there's interests that are, multifactorial, as I said, regulatory and monetary in the end, that drive
Yeah.
that complexity. And if you look at the costs in healthcare and the quality of outcome, it's pretty simple to define what's the problem. Because if you
Yeah.
there's just fun numbers. 25 years ago to 2000, we spent, I think it was around 180, maybe 200 billion euros on healthcare in Germany. Now it's about almost 500 billion.
Well, yep.
Um, Obviously, there's inflation, but still,
Yep.
it hasn't been that much. And
Yep.
at the same time, simple factor for quality of outcome is the life expectancy. That
Yep.
has changed from, I think, 73 years to 78 years on average now. So
Yep.
it's not, we do not have a quality issue, we have a cost issue, and the cost issue is simply administrative tasks.
Yeah.
And yeah, so also there, just fun fact, beginning of 2000, we had around 110,000 full-time employee equivalents in the German hospital industry, and today
Yep.
it's almost 180,000.
Wow.
And we're talking about sort of the lack of doctors in the system. We have way more. We just don't feel them because they're just busy doing something else than treating patients.
Yeah. That's incredible. And I mean, you obviously touched on the costs and that being an issue, obviously medical billing. What would you say makes medical billing so complex? And then maybe touch on, how DAMEDIC simplifies that.
So, the system, what we touch upon is as DAMEDIC. So I'm going to answer that question specific to the field we are answering, because there's
Yeah.
different billing fields in the German healthcare service industry, but we are addressing the inpatient, publicly insured people that are being treated normally in a hospital structure,
Yeah.
and they are being billed by so-called DRGs, which is that's a term for the disease-related groups, originated. That sort of a system originated, actually was brought to Germany in the mid 2000s, as a sort of a copycat of the Australian system. And
Okay.
the way it evolved was, the German system is very specifically sort of drawn by the by the uh, by the aspect of finding individual, most accurate forms of diagnosis related groups that represent the cost structure of a case. And meaning, if you think that in a way that actually it gives a good representation of all these very diverse sort of treatment paths in a hospital, that drives you into complexity simply due to the fact that you're trying to cover everything that there is in a way that it's fair to the diagnosis related group, so it actually covers the real related costs on a not individual, but on a sort of a small cluster basis.
Yeah.
If you compare that to the Australian system, for example, their clusters on the billing end are just way more sort of broader, set in a broader sense. So the average probably has the same level of reimbursement, but your individual sort of cases in that cluster are differently weighted. So yeah, that complexity and that sort of a focus on here representing the individual cases in the most accurate way, I think that's sort of what really has driven it to the point in
Yeah.
time. So if you ask a clinic manager on whether he's coding and billing in the right way, in the end, he cannot tell whether a case as it's being there actually is built in the way it's meant to be built. And this sort of a complexity in the outcome is just not graspable, and that's where DAMEDIC actually comes into place, and just by using computing power and logics, trying to grasp that for the process in place, and gives a feedback on whether the outcome is of a case from the treatment end is represented in the way that it's accurate and gives the right results.
Yeah.
That's sort of the original idea of it.
Yeah. No, brilliant. And I mean, Rupi, obviously with your medical background, how would you say that that has influenced the way that you build technology solutions?
I think from a logical way, in order to understand a problem, you have to experience it. And having had the experience of working as a doctor, it has shown me that there is an issue, and I wasn't interested in it at the time, but I still saw it as a burden for me working, that there is something I do not understand. I do not like it, so I ignore it, and I just carry on with it as a doctor. But however, when we changed the perspective, obviously this experience was a great sort of a insight, and therefore technology doesn't have its own right of existence. It's always a tool to solve a problem. And having understand that problem, I think that's the key thing for everything you build. Having something to solve that is measurable and experienceable for the one that is being sort of held back by the issue or problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically not really a direct link, but more so a way of teaching you how to approach a problem, how to problem solve. I guess in that way it then is linked.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's understanding a problem, solving a problem, is the key dynamic, and technology itself is simply an enabler to do
Yeah.
so. And
Yeah.
yeah, then you got to have the right people that build or provide you with the technology. And I was at DAMEDIC, and also earlier, but DAMEDIC in particular, very lucky to find the right match.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me of a conversation that I had, when I was a bit younger, still in school with my family, arguing about why do I have to do mathematics? I'm not going to use this ever again. Some people will, of course, some people won't. But I think, what they said to me is, we get that you may not use it down the line, but it teaches you a way to think, to problem solve. You're not probably going to be using Pythagoras, in your next job or anything, but it teaches you how to problem solve and think and visualize things. So yeah, I think that just kind of reminds me of
Yeah,
a similar conversation I had.
definitely is
Yeah,
exactly that sort of an analogy that
yeah,
is correct. It's a way of thinking, and I mean it's experience based upon that gives you a
yeah,
certain perspective on things, on problems, and then, well, it sort of identifies chances, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Rupi, I want to take it back now to DAMEDIC. DAMEDIC has scaled without external investment. Was that a deliberate strategy?
To be frank, no. Um,
Yeah,
I guess we were lucky at the right time. Initially, we had the great pleasure when we started as DAMEDIC, building a pure software product at the time, and that we found really great business angels that supported us at the time, and also we raised a bit of a pre-seed sort of a money in order to build the first software versions of the current tooling. However, uh, we understood one thing, and that sort of changed the whole course of DAMEDIC, and also the way of how we approach things. Um, that software itself, particular in a personal driven environment, as in a hospital, software itself doesn't change necessarily anything, in the sense that it brings the solution. It just provides you a tool to do that. And
yeah,
if you do not organize your processes in the right way, it doesn't have any effect. So when we switched from pure software to tech-enabled managed service as a strategy, we hired people as kind of just service people for the billing process that we sold, in the sense that we would provide our service to different customers. In the first place, there was people just being sold on an hourly basis or case basis, and that would cross-finance our own software development from that point in time. So
yeah,
that was just, I guess, I mean, luck is one way to look at it. It was the business sense, I guess, at the same time, that had us, also the necessity that actually brought us from that. Okay, we're going to build this sort of a venture that is just VC funded, and we're going to push it, and we're going to sort of drive it into that exponential curve, whatever it was at the time that was related
yeah,
to the external financing requirements. And luckily, we found a different way, and I think it's
yeah.
the absolute right way for that industry, because it's a slow moving industry, particularly in a B2B hospital environment.
Yeah. And then maybe a last question on DAMEDIC, before we move on to a couple of other, I guess, questions to get your personal thoughts on. Where would you say you see DAMEDIC in the next 5 years? What is sort of the vision for DAMEDIC in the next 5 years?
Um, you know what? I don't really care. The point
Okay.
there is, we as a company are, and that's, I think, what I care about. And the other one, where do we stand in the business sense, kind of
Yeah.
derives from it. As a company, we have uh, sort of, where do I want to see DAMEDIC in 5 years? As a company that has lived up to its most important values and principles that we set today, and is sort of still up, so living up to these principles and values in 5 years in time.
Yeah.
And that's embracing change. It's something very positive and challenging at the same time, driving the value for customers beyond what they can actually imagine,
Yeah.
because they're just being carried on and then sort of nurtured, and enabling our employees to achieve exactly that. And
Yeah.
billing, where we are in right now, is going to change. And I want us to be there in 5 years' time, to be the one company that actually changed that, in the sense
Yeah.
that I always compare it to the laboratory sort of world in hospitals in the late 90s, beginning of 2000s. Almost every hospital had its own laboratory sort of unit. And now I
Yeah.
think it's almost 80% of all the lab values being sort of generated are being generated by managed service laboratories in the end, that
Yeah.
aggregate, concentrate the services in their centers and then provide the institutions with the results. And billing is going to be organized the same way from my perspective, and it's it's not that it's necessarily for every hospital, but just the sort of demographics and also the complexity is prone for a managed tech-enabled service. Obviously, that's one end, and we'll see. I mean, it's if you start in that field from the sort of billing end and understanding the outcomes of the care provided, you can derive multiple things from it. However, there's clear principle. You want to focus on the one problem and then jump to the other. And in order to have a chance of success, the problem you want to solve is always sort of graspable in the way that you have clear numbers, you have clear benefiters and recipients of your service that sort of feel the improvement in a positive
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, brilliant. Thanks, Rupi, for obviously sharing information, on DAMEDIC. I think, great
Yeah.
business, and I'm sure something that you're obviously very proud of. You speak really obviously highly of it. Just a few questions, kind of to get your personal thoughts on things before we wrap up the podcast. Rupi, what would you say are the biggest risks in building a healthcare focused tech company?
Well, there's always risk involved in building companies. So uh, what the biggest risk is, I don't know. But I think the most important thing you got to focus upon when you start a company is finding that problem, that is at the one hand side felt on the potential recipients user side, whatever the sort of the person is you're addressing. Um, at the same time, that problem should be well defined and sort of, if you solve it, the outcome has got to be measurable in two ways. First, number wise,
Yeah.
obviously that should be as direct as possible, and the other one should be emotional. So the ones you're so solving the problem for should be positively sort of embraced by the solution and therefore accepted.
Yeah.
Because change is something hard, and you don't do, as especially as a young company. I think it's the the sort of greatest mistake you can make is particularly in that environment, healthcare, and even more particular in hospitals, is underestimating change management as a sort of a prevalence for a prerequisite for your solution to actually arrive. And
Yeah.
therefore, yeah, that's it. So find so your problem, create a solution, and do it one step at a time. I think that's key.
Yeah. Yeah. No, brilliant. Now, I've also heard, some people sort of fear AI in healthcare. Maybe they're not sure how it fits in with healthcare. I mean, how would you address that?
But as said, AI is a commodity in the end, and it doesn't solve anything. It just enables you if you accept it.
Yeah.
But technology itself doesn't change it. As said, it's the process that has got to be changed. And in institutions where that's happening, I think you can perceive the dynamics and the enablements through the AI as something very positive. However, 85% of people dislike change. So I think
Yeah.
that's sort of where the shit hits the fan, in the sense that
Yeah.
that change is perceived as negative in the first place. And I think what's critical there is finding these use cases where you actually are able to show that the outcomes driven by technology, whether it's AI or whatever, um, uh, relieve the people of what their issues are. And
Yeah.
however, looking forward, I guess we all have got to accept that the world is going to change, and
Yeah.
we are gonna experience something that we haven't seen, I guess, since the steam engine was sort of invented,
Yeah.
and it really is going to change the way on how we think, or not think, how we take decisions, and how we um, organize processes around that, because the decisions are not going to be made by us anymore.
Yeah.
It's going to be algorithms, whatever, that drive that.
Yeah.
We're just going to make sure that we carry it and communicate it in the right way. So I think for healthcare in particular, it's going to be daunting what the effect's going to be. But Hammond's law, you're overestimating the short-term effects and you're underestimating the long-term effects. Right now, we're in that
Yeah.
phase
Yeah.
we are in the short term and we're overestimating it.
Yeah.
The effects are not there yet, but we see clearly on the horizon that things are gonna on the technological end is gonna enable us to do things in a way we haven't thought about it before, and therefore, how do we address it? I mean, as said, we're solving issues, and that's a relief, and that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you try and resist the change, you'll be left behind. And I think in this instance, being left behind is not an option.
Absolutely.
So
AI.
yeah,
There's a great
yeah,
little essay from Ravi Gupta, I think. The headline is "AI or Die." It's a
yeah,
wonderful little piece of
yeah.
words that
Exactly.
describe the need.
Yeah, yeah. Rupi, last question before we wrap up. The relationship between doctors and technology, obviously that needs to evolve. It is evolving. How do you see that happening?
As said, doctors are like people, are normal people, and in the end, people dislike change.
Yeah,
So technology, what is technology? Technology is just an enabler, and doctors itself are not going to be the ones. I mean, there's going to be doctors that build solutions with technology, but at the point in time, I think doctors are sort of stuck in their own behaviors, and the good thing about the doctors I experience, at least, is that once they understand the benefits of change, they're able to change, and therefore, once you see uh, the change in the person in a positive way, I think doctors are very, very adaptable in that sense. And therefore, yes, you're gonna have these retraction forces also in these
yeah,
sort of in this field, professional field, but it's at the same time, as we defined it, spend time with patients on admin. They dislike the admin part, and if we help them do that by technology, they're the first ones to jump on the train. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, I'm therefore, I think it's going to be a great world where we do not have to take care of that whole admin stuff anymore, and
yeah,
really focus on, yeah, the ensuring the patient has a good feeling by while being treated, and whether the
yeah,
treatment and the decision on how being treated is actually generated by a doctor's decision or AI decision. I would probably, in 10 years' time at least, at the latest, feel better when the AI gives the decision and the doctor itself is just the communicator. But
yeah.
it's the way how you communicate, and I think that's where doctors belong.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Rupi, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, speaking about your background, DAMEDIC, a bit about what you think, about AI in the future. Yeah, thank you very much for coming on to Vision to Venture. We really thank you, for your time.
Well, I appreciate it a lot, and well, looking forward and to what's coming up, and we carry on.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Vision to Venture. If you're listening, make sure to give us a 5-star review, And if you're watching, like and subscribe to listen to more inspiring stories from tech leaders.